Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Dorothy Mashburn, I am so excited about our having the opportunity to talk today. I know that we are going to talk about great tips and techniques in the recruiting and salary negotiation process. So thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Bob. It's such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Dorothy, one of my signature questions that my listeners love to hear about on the guests that I have on the show is, what was it when you were a child that you thought you wanted to be when you grew up?
I love that question. And I don't think anybody else has asked me this in any of the podcasts that I've guested on. So I am originally from India. And what I wanted to be at that time was an international movie star. And I don't know why, but I had seen movies like Roman Holiday and Breakfast at Tiffany's. And I kind of sort of wanted to be Audrey Hepburn. But of course, I wasn't ever brave enough to say that out loud. But yeah, that was my hopes and dreams.
And then what were the transition moments, Dorothy, that you experienced from that time as a child that you saw yourself as being an international movie star to where you're at today?
That's quite a few years in between, but I think the international side still stayed strong. At age of 18, I came to the United States. I came as a undergrad student, and before that, I wanted to have a education that would lead to some sort of a international degree. So a lot of my education was focused on English literature, learning about history and cultural nuances of different countries. So a lot of the learnings was sort of placed towards getting that, what a friend of mine calls being a global majority in this beautiful planet Earth of ours. So that was kind of the steps. And then, once I got to the United States, I ended up meeting my husband here in college, ended up staying instead of going back to India. The rest, as they say, is history.
Dorothy, I've seen in your writing before that you talk about the corporate hustle, and you kind of went on to say rising through challenges and the eventual desire for something more. What did you mean when you wrote that out?
So corporate hustle to me, we get busy trying to deliver results, navigating a lot of dynamics, whether it's political or cultural within different organizations. And then also having worked in publicly held companies, we're so focused on delivering results. And sometimes that kind of being on a treadmill kind of feel tends to feel like a hustle. And so it's been described different ways, like being on a hamster wheel, being on a hustle. But basically, to me, it is, we deliver results this year, then next year we've got to deliver 20% more, and then 20% more. So in that, it's very powerful, which is what is the engine that drives growth and progress in our country. So which is absolutely fantastic, nothing wrong with it. But from an individual perspective, you sometimes tend to lose yourself in that hustle. hustle. And you kind of tend to forget that there is a unique you that is, has a desire to do more than just deliver those results for Wall Street. And for me, that was a service type of a purpose. And for people, it would materialize in different ways. But for me, it was a being of service. And which is why, and that's what we're going to talk about today, Bob, is what that service looks like and how that fulfills me and fills my bucket. And that drives me forward in the business that I'm doing and all the work that you see me doing on LinkedIn and as well as the podcast.
You go on to write about the entrepreneurial leap, turning passion into a purpose. And I assume that that is in reference to what you're talking about, your service mentality. Can you explain that just a little bit further for us?
So over the years, as I've navigated my own career within, not-for-profit organizations, large corporations, mid-sized corporations, I have helped many, many junior talented individuals who, were in the same boat, say, that I was 10 years ago. And I helped them, either get promotions, get job offers, get interviews, and then negotiate their salaries. And this is just by default happened over the years, the last 15 to 20 years, where people reach out and say, hey, I've seen you, navigate this boardroom discussion. I'd like to pick your brain on how to do that. And so as I started thinking about, more about purpose and meaning, especially during the COVID years, I decided that this is my true calling because people reach out to me and I don't even think about it really. And that's the true definition, I think, of what comes easy to you, what you naturally lean into, and what drives you, gets you excited, and helping others navigate their careers, discuss job offers, navigate and negotiate salaries was something that I was already doing. And so that became the seed for the business idea of doing this as a business. About a year and a half ago is when I enlisted with a coach to just understand, how do you engage and launch a business full time? And so that was the genesis and the reason behind why I do what I do, which is now interviewing and salary negotiation coaching for executive men and women. That's exactly what the leap was all about, was saying, okay, I'm doing this ad hoc one-off basis, and now I'm going to formalize it and make it into an actual business.
Dorothy, I've heard you talk about resources and tools to build up confidence and shatter the limiting beliefs that a candidate might have. So first of all, what does a limiting belief mean? And second, what are some of those resources? And third, how can I get some of those resources?
Okay, so the first question is limiting beliefs. These are whether because of social programming, conditioning, or feedback that we have received that stops us from going all the way in, whether it is getting that big job, getting that big salary, having that big dream. So I'll give you an example. So sometimes I've seen clients when they talk about getting that next big job, and you talk about transitions, of course. So let's talk about transitions. So we think in ourselves, like today I'm an analyst. So tomorrow I must be a senior analyst. Then I can be a manager. Then I can be a senior manager. But what if that is something, an artificial construct that we made up in our minds, because no one told us that we have to follow this step by step by step, right? To a certain extent, it's true, but not necessarily, and especially if you're transitioning from one job to another. So really, if you are a senior analyst and performing at a high talented leader in your role, if you transition to, say, maybe a smaller company or maybe even an adjacent company, you could potentially be that senior manager. But what that limiting belief tells us is that in our minds, it stops us from making that big leap. And that's just one example. Areas that I would recommend people to think about is, what are some things that we've taken for granted over the years? It would show up as, oh, I'm not really good at public speaking. Well, are you really not, or have you not given yourself a chance to, right? Like just starting to question will help you think first, what is my limiting belief? And second, is it truly true about me, or is it something I can get past? And then your question was, where can you get some of this? I would recommend definitely following the podcast, Salary Negotiations Made Simple. I provide a lot of free value on finding your true voice, finding your confidence, and then overcoming those limiting beliefs. And then there are many, many books out there. One book that I would recommend is a researcher named Carol Dweck. She has done a lot of work on fixed mindset and growth mindset. And I recommend anything by her to everybody all day, because her work is truly inspirational. And she really goes into the science of what mindset and what the psychology behind those limiting beliefs can be.
You've described that limiting belief, which is, I think, another term for fears. What other fears do you see in candidates as they go through their job search process? And how do you coach people to help deal with those fears?
Fears come up in so many different ways, but the biggest one is simply fear of failure, right? And it manifests in different ways. Sometimes people will say things like, I don't know if I'm good enough for this role, or I don't know if they will shut me down if I ask for a pay raise at my current job, or even that other person has a lot more experience than I do, and so I'm not even going to try. Well, the reason you're not even going to try, it begs the question, is it because you fear a negative response? And most probably it is. Sometimes people also fear a damage to a relationship. So say you have a great relationship with your manager and you feel, if I go and ask for a pay raise and they say no, then the relationship might feel a little bit awkward come tomorrow or the next day. So people have these fears that they have artificially built in their minds. Sometimes they're based on true experience, and sometimes it's based on what we see other people talk about or what kind of conditioning we've received as we've grown up. And Bob, what was the next question? The second part of that question?
And how do you deal with those fears?
I, of course, am a huge proponent of coaching because I'm a coach and I have a coach. If coaching is not for you, what I would recommend is a tool within coaching, which is coaching through journaling. So what you would do if you do have a fear that you've identified, like, why am I fearing so much to go talk to my manager to ask for that promotion, or ask for that raise, or ask for that high visibility project? You could start journaling that. You can say, you can ask yourself this question: what am I so afraid of when it comes to asking or being more assertive with my manager? Then you could start writing it down. Like, I don't know what I'm afraid, but it just seems like if I did that, I would receive a no, and then I would shut the door on the relationship. And then you would ask yourself the question again: what is so bad about them shutting me down? And then you answer it. And so you follow this kind of question and answer, and you journal it because, as we know, the science tells us that when we write, it really helps our brain process better. So you could try this technique to identify and then start really challenging those limiting beliefs, those fears, to say, is this real, or is this something that I've just created in my mind and made it bigger?
Dorothy, how does an individual effectively communicate the transferable skills that they have when they're transitioning to maybe a new career path, a new role, or a completely new industry?
Bob, you and I know there are so many great tools out there right now. There's one that is I will give you a technology tool. One is called TEAL, T-E-A-L. You can use that to identify any job description. You can copy paste a job description in it and ask that, it's AI based, of course, to tell you what kind of skills are really behind all of the words in the job description. And then you can also ask TEAL to review your resume and look for similarities and gaps. And again, this is all about being efficient, using technology to your advantage, and saying, okay, so if I want this job description, let's say it's program management, and let's say I'm a teacher. TEAL will be great at telling you what are some of the areas that as a teacher you normally do, naturally do, that aligns with project management. You manage a class, you manage stakeholders, you communicate day in and day out with students, teachers, and parents. So those are all skills that a program manager uses on a day-to-day basis. And so right there and right then, you can see how those skills can easily be transferable to a program manager role. The second tool I will recommend is, if you don't want to mess with Teal, you can simply use ChatGPT. Have ChatGPT review your job description as well as your resume, and then use the prompt with ChatGPT to say, what are some of the differences or gaps that I need to understand before I go into this interview? And ChatGPT will give you a list. Same thing with asking for similarities. So again, there are like easier ways now to do this. And I definitely recommend people use that technology to their advantage. Other piece on the transferable skills I will recommend is doing informational interviews. And I'm a huge proponent of this, especially now that the job market is so unpredictable. What happens with informational interviews is you get to talk to a company that you are targeting or an organization and start understanding their culture because you did that informational interview. I'll give you an example. So I have a client who wants to get into biotech, and she's going through these informational interviews. The first one you do at a junior level. So you start with a junior analyst, you reach out. They usually have more time and they are willing to, spare 30 minutes to talk to you. And so what she's gleaned from that is the culture of the companies, what they value. So a lot of discussion on patient care, healthcare, value-based care. So now that she's doing these informational sessions, she's gleaning these words that then she can use her current skills, which she's an educator. And so she's going to use those current skills, weave in some of these words and phrases that she's gleaning from those informational sessions. So right there, when you do that, you're speaking the language of the company that you're targeting. And so that transferable skill becomes even more attractive to the interviewer when you are in that formal interview setting.
Dorothy, let's say you get the question, tell me about yourself. How do you use that as an opportunity to really respond to what that company is looking for?
Oh, I love that question. And it is something we need to practice, right? Because we think we've got it, but we don't. But here's a formula. So usually when they ask you, tell me a little bit about yourself, they want to know your presence. They want to know if you've thought about the company. So here's a formula: who you are, what do you do, how do you help, and how does that help translate into actionable results? So for me, it would be, hi, I'm Dorothy Mashburn. I'm an interview and salary negotiation coach. What do? I help executives confidently negotiate their value. How do I help that? Through coaching and role modeling and practice. And then what do they receive? My clients at the end of my coaching are able to secure over 60% increase in their salary. So use this formula. No matter what, it can help you. And always remember, what they receive is the most important part of that formula. So any company that you're looking at, you will of course have done your research on that company and on that role specifically. Then you say, again, going back to the example of program management, you would say, and any project I have managed in the past has delivered on time and under budget. So as a program manager, what more can they wish for, right? So you go after and speak in the language of that job description and you are set.
Dorothy, let's say now that we did all the right things during the interview process and we have a job offer. Now we're going to start talking a bit about salary negotiations. And I'd be curious, your coaching with your clients, when they say, I was asked the question, what are your salary expectations? And I didn't know how to answer that. How do you help your clients with that question?
This question is going to be asked probably at least 2 times, at least 2, if not more. The first time is if you're working with a recruiter, they're going to ask you that. So my advice to you, what are your salary expectations, is to try and delay as much as possible. And here's why. So a recruiter, and again, this is different from situation to situation, but let's say a recruiter is trying to get the right candidate in front of the hiring manager as quickly as possible. Their goal is to get you to say a number as quickly as possible and then sift you out of that. So you could say something like, they'll say, what are your salary expectations? If you say 90,000 to 120,000 and their budget is say 89,000, they will sift you out of there. They don't want to waste time because they're busy. So it's really in your best interest to try and delay answering this question as much as possible. So instead, when you're talking to the recruiter, you can ask this question: what is the budget for this role? And generally speaking, and especially with transparency laws, recruiters are willing to give you a range. And so let's say they say 90 to 125,000. And at this point, what you can say, okay, great. Don't give a number still. Just say, I'm sure we can work something out. Let's learn a little bit more about the job and the job description, and I'll be able to better tell you exactly what my salary expectations are. Will that be okay? And just leave it at that. Okay, so that's the first part. When you're just trying to get through the gatekeepers, your goal is to get in front of the hiring manager and show that you are the person that can solve the problem that's keeping that hiring manager up at night. And once you do that, now at job offer time, you do have a ton of leverage. And so this is what you're waiting for. And at this point, assuming you have done your homework, which of course we speak a lot about doing that preparation time, when they ask you what your salary expectations are, you will provide a two-part number. So you will have in the preparation time develop three numbers. One is your dream number, one is your desired number, and one is your deal breaker number. So your dream number is, say, at the high end of the range. So in this case was 125. You could say your dream could be 125 or even higher. And your desired could be 110,000. And then your deal breaker could be the salary you're making right now. So maybe you're making 90,000. You wouldn't change, assuming you're moving for money, you wouldn't really change for same salary. So 90,000 would be your deal breaker number. And when the hiring manager asks, what are your salary expectations? You would say 110 to 125,000, knowing that at least your desired number is at that bottom of the range. Does that make sense, Bob?
Totally. And Dorothy, how do you find some of those market values? You just picked in this example 100 and 125,000 as your desired and dreamed. But as I'm trying to set those parameters that I can talk about, are there tools, resources that I can look to help me set that and be realistic?
Absolutely. Yeah, I recommend getting 3 data points when you're doing your homework on market information. So you would go to our regular sites we know, PayScale, Indeed. They provide a general direction of, again, sticking with the project manager example, what a project manager in Redmond, Washington would be making. Then you would go into more specific sites, and I will give you 3 sites here. One is teamblind.com. Team Blind is a site that is anonymous but takes data points from anybody who gets into that site. So if I go visit the site, it's going to prompt me to put in my job title and my salary range. And it collects hundreds and thousands of these data points and then normalizes it. So Team Blind is a way to understand what a program manager in Redmond is going to make based on actual data. And of course, there are outliers, and the app actually manages and normalizes the data based on all of the information that comes in. Another one is h1data.info. This is a site that companies, when they sponsor visas for work from outside the country, they're required to, by law, reveal how much they paid. And so this data site contains information from those companies that have reported. So there is another data point for you. And then the third site is Levels FYI, another site that contains specific job and related salary information. So now you have your generic websites, these specific websites, and the third one is you must check with your network. So best place to go with alumni networks, and there are plenty of them in Facebook, LinkedIn, and to say, hi friend from class of whatever, can we chat for a few minutes and request some informational session time with them and ask what kind of salary range they're willing to disclose to you. Most people will be quite happy to share a range. So even if you can't get an exact number, a range is just good enough. And so now you have 3 data points, and you triangulate based on those 3 data points to get to those 3 deal breaker, desired, and dream numbers.
So Dorothy, let's say that you've set your range, but you now want to increase it after you've gone through that interviewing process. Any coaching that you'd give in that situation?
This is a question I get quite a lot. And I actually just did a carousel on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday. People ask, so let's say this is an example. You went in and you said, my desired salary is 185. And then throughout the interview, as you talk to stakeholders, as you go through all of the interview rounds, and let's say this is a marketing role, you find out that the goal of this role is to increase the customer acquisitions, but the market is extremely saturated. And you wouldn't have known this in the beginning as you start the salary discussions or even the interview process. And so as you find out, when it's time for offer, that is the time to say, we had discussed 185, but we know now that through the discussions with the stakeholders, that this is a very lofty goal. And based on my experience, I can absolutely deliver, and I have done it. However, the lift or the skills required to take us from point A to point B, which is getting more customers in an oversaturated market, is significantly more than what we had discussed in the beginning of the interview process. So based on that, my reformed or revised job salary expectation is now 210 to 225, whatever that new number you believe based on your homework is. This is the right way to do it. There is a wrong way to do it, which is if they offer you 185, you say, oh yeah, great, 185. Then you go back and then you come back a day later and say, oh, I changed my mind. Now that is when they're going to start questioning whether you have the right talent or do you have the right level of integrity for this role. So there's going to be some questions asked about that. So the best time to do it is right before you accept the offer, if not even sooner, if you're able to provide some indication that, wow, this is a lot bigger lift than what the job description said. That would be the time to bring up the increase in the salary expectations.
Dorothy, in those negotiations, you're going to get rejections. They're going to say no, they're going to counter and not meet your needs. So it's going to be an emotional roller coaster. How do you coach your clients on ways to deal with those ups and downs in the negotiation?
The thing you have to go in the mindset is really there are three possible options and you prepare for all three, right? One is straight out no, take it or leave it. And very rarely does that happen because once they provide that offer, they're willing to work with you. Two is yes, whatever you need, right? Which is also kind of rare. And three is kind of sort of, which is you ask for 210, we can make 210, we can probably do 190. So that's the time to say, great. And one mindset that I coach my clients on is don't hate the no, love the no, because no to us and as negotiators is the start of negotiations. Because when they say no, you can start asking curiosity-based questions like, oh, 190, what is preventing us from getting to 210? And then ask that open-ended question. And they could say budgets, or they could say, this is kind of the ceiling of this role. Whatever they say, then you can start probing even more. So is it the ceiling based on budget? And maybe they say yes. What other budgets are available to find a way to get me to 210? Maybe it's executive coach. Maybe it's extra learning and development. Maybe it's flexible work on Fridays. So there are many different ways to skin the cat, so to speak, but don't fear the no. So as soon as you can get that fear of no out of your brain, you can really negotiate a very, very strong deal for yourself. And then the second part of that is I always ask my clients to aim big. And what do I mean by that? Most people, if we are not trained in negotiation, this is how our brains will work. So, I think I'm worth 135,000, but they may say no, and I don't want to appear too greedy. So I'm going to go with 120. And then the day off, we'll say, 120 might be just too lofty. I'm going to go with 110. And inevitably, the other side counters, and we end up at, say, 108,000 or 105,000. But what if instead of starting at 150 and going down to 110, we go, how about 210, right? And then say, I'm saying this number out, but I am planning to fail. So, but you say it 210, and they counter at, say, 185, you are still so much better off. You failed at your 210, but so plan to fail, but still plan to get more than what you have originally would have gotten if you had just gone in with like the 110, 105 and kind of nickel and diming yourself in your mind. So go big is my message here.
Dorothy, where have you been my entire career and to help me aim big? I love that example. As we kind of wind down here, Dorothy, any other books or other resources? You mentioned the one earlier. Anything else that you would suggest to our listeners as they're going through their job transition and they're negotiating their compensation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge reader, and I know some people are and some people are not. One handbook I will recommend is Informational Interview Handbook by Jeff Neal. Jeff is a coach himself, and I found this on Amazon just by browsing. And it's a great handbook that gives you practical steps to conduct those interview sessions with higher ups and executives. So you can position yourself so you tap into that hidden job market and you get yourself in front of the decision makers. So really great handbook, and it's very practical. So probably like 10, $15 on Amazon. So I would recommend that. It's right now with the job market being saturated and unpredictable, I've been recommending informational sessions as the way to really get jobs that are not necessarily advertised in the public domains.
Dorothy, we've covered so much material, great tips and techniques. If our listeners can remember only 3 things from today, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away?
The point that you like, Bob, is go big. If nothing else, if you don't remember anything else, you don't even remember my name, remember this, go big. This is going to serve you big time in the long run because, there's a lot of research out there that says our outer limits are so far out there that we don't even try to get close to it. If our limit is 250, we are at 10. So even if you go big, you're not going to go so big that it's going to make you look greedy or unprofessional. So don't be afraid to go big. Second, I would say is don't fear no. No is your friend. Now, if you've negotiated as I have over 600-700 deals, no is really truly your friend because that's when you start asking the question. So as soon as you can get to a no, it's actually better for your negotiation. So remember that. And then third is look inward and challenge your limiting beliefs. They're different for everyone. So I can't give you a peanut butter spread of exactly what limiting beliefs to start questioning. But think of the one thing that you would love to do tomorrow, but you're not doing because of X, Y, and Z. Start questioning, is this a limiting belief? Is this something that I'm fearful of and therefore not willing to take the next step? So once you start doing that, it's really going to free you up to really live not just a great career, but have a great life. And those are my 3 tips.
Dorothy, I knew from the first time that we started talking that you were someone that lived life by going big, and you delivered on that today. I want to thank you from my listeners and for myself as well. I appreciate your caring and sharing so many great ideas.
Thank you for having me, Bob. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.